Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar of the Productivity and Profitability webinar series. This series is being brought to you by Meat and Livestock Australia and AgSTAR. This series is designed to assist sheep, cattle and goat producers to increase the productivity and profitability of their businesses. In this series, we'll provide you with timely technical information that's relevant to producers across Australia. My name is Tanisha Shields and I am a consultant with AgSTAR and I will be your host for tonight's webinar. I would like to begin this webinar by acknowledging Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, learn and work. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and to our shared future. In tonight's webinar, I'm very excited to be hearing from Callen Thomspon about growing beef from dairy. Before I hand over to Callen, I would like to just cover off the housekeeping for tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is being recorded and there will be a copy of the recording available on the AgSTAR and MLA websites later this week. Throughout the webinar, we invite you to ask questions of Callen. We will answer these questions at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please head to slido.com and enter the code July 2024, and that's where you'll be able to ask your questions. Or you can also scan the QR code that's on the screen. So to ask any questions, head to slido.com and enter the code July 2024. Just while we're starting tonight's webinar, while there's a few still coming in, we'll go through a really quick introduction survey on Slido. So if everyone could head to slido.com and enter the code July 2024, we'll go through the introductory survey. So the first question in the survey that you can find on Slido is what best describes your role in industry? So are you a primary producer or an advisor / consultant or other service provider? So I'll get everyone to head to slido.com or scan the QR code that's on the screen and enter what your role is in industry. We'll leave this poll open for a few more moments or about another minute or two, while everyone heads to Slido and enters that code July 2024. Got a few responses starting to come in now, so we're starting to find the Slido link. So slido.com, July 2024, or scan the QR code. So we've got 100% advisors that have voted so far. We'll just give you all another minute or so to get your responses in. Starting to get a few roll in now. So it looks like we've got majority, 67% that have responded being primary producers, and then around a third being advisors or consultants to the industry. I'll just leave that poll open for another 10 seconds or so while we've got a few more responses coming in, and then we'll go to the next question. All right, so now we've got 71% producers in the room and 29% advisors. The next question, which most people have already gone through and answered, is what area do you manage? Then sheep, we've got 50, 400 and none. We've got a few more cattle producers in the room and a couple of goat producers as well. Thank you, everyone. I'll just leave that survey open for one more moment. So I'll give you a few more seconds and we'll get into the content of tonight's webinar. Before I hand over to Callen, I'd just like to introduce tonight's speaker. Tonight's speaker is Callen Thomspon. Callen is a consultant with AgSTAR Projects, working with producers, advisors and industry professionals to improve their on-farm outcomes through targeted extension. Callen is also involved in extension adoption projects for RDCs and government. Callen worked for 10 years as a commercial agronomist with integrated beef, sheep and cropping systems in central west New South Wales and on the Liverpool Plains. He has worked with producers in Northern Australia to develop cropping systems on pastoral properties with the Northern Territory Government. Most recently, Callen worked as a mixed farm advisor for local land services in central west New South Wales. Callen and Maria own and manage a 640 hectare beef cattle property at Coonabarabran, running breeder cows on native and tropical pastures and growing out weaners on forage crops to supply to feed lots. Thank you very much, Callen. I'm looking forward to your presentation tonight. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Tanisha. I'll share my screen. So can you see that?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Callen.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, thanks to MLA and AgSTAR for inviting me to talk to everybody tonight. So as Tanisha said, I'm speaking about growing beef from dairy. So I'll just give you a bit of an outline of what we're doing tonight. I'll give you a bit of an understanding of what dairy beef is. I'll talk to you about the growing beef from dairy project that we've been working on. Then we'll discuss a few opportunities for beef producers to get involved in the dairy beef supply chain, some of the barriers that we've picked up as part of our project, some of the things that we as an industry probably need to fix to build the industry, and give you some next steps of what you could do if you want to get involved in dairy beef. So the Growing Beef from Dairy project is a project that is 50% funded by MLA and 50% funded by Dairy Australia. So AgSTAR Project has been contracted by both organisations to run the project. Within our team, there's myself, Maria, Jane Pryor and Jane Phillips and Michael Campbell. So we're the consultants working on the project. And we'll talk a bit more about the project a bit later on in the presentation. So I guess the first thing is I have a question for you guys watching the presentation. Is what sort of animal do you think of when you hear about dairy calves going into the beef supply chain? And I just want you to have a bit of a think about animals that you think might fit into this chain, what you've seen. And I wonder whether it's this. This is Knickers. I think Knickers is from Western Australia. Knickers is one of maybe the biggest steer in the world. So yeah, Knickers is a big animal, fairly bony animal, low yielding. Or are you thinking of something like this? So this may look like just a black baldy steer, an Angus cross Hereford, but that's actually an Angus Holstein animal. You can see it's probably it's not an overly muscular animal. It's probably a C muscle, but it doesn't really look like a dairy cow. And so this is where we sort of want everybody to start thinking, if I can get everybody in this presentation to I guess change the way they think of what a dairy beef animal might look like, I think this presentation has been a success for us for this project. If people start thinking about this animal rather than Knickers, that's a real win for us. So in the current situation, we've got a national dairy herd of approximately 1.4 million. That's come from 2022 data. 35% of the calves that come from that dairy herd, keep in mind that for a dairy cow to produce milk, it generally has to have a calf. So we've got these calves being produced out of our dairy herd. So 35% of those calves are kept as replacements. So they go back into the dairy supply chain. They're milkers as they grow older. Then we've got these surplus calves. So it's potentially around 900,000, and there's a couple of different pathways for those calves. So some of them might go to surplus dairy to sale and export. So there has been a market in China, I understand, for those export heifers. Some of them may die or be euthanized at birth on farm. They may be bobby calves, so slaughtered at 5 to 30 days through a accredited abattoir. And to collect them, there's a truck often that comes around and picks them up and takes them to the abattoir. Or they could be dairy beef. And so dairy beef can be straight dairy animals or a beef cross. So we'll have a bit of a discussion about that in a later slide. So when we first started this project, Sarah Bolton was working for Dairy Australia, and she was, I guess, the Dairy Australia lead on this project. And she came up with a term, wicked problem or underutilized opportunity. So a wicked problem is a problem that's really hard to solve, but if we could solve it, it'd create great benefit. And it really sums up the dairy beef supply chain. We can see that when the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator increase, so our cattle beef prices go up, the number of bobby calves slaughtered goes down because these calves are being put back into the beef supply chain. So this data's come from DA itself. It's really clear that as the prices have gone up, we've got a lot more of these animals going into the meat supply chain. So there's a real opportunity for us to capitalize on this, for us to do a better job of growing them out, make sure they are really good beef animals going into our market. So MLA and DA came together to, I guess, build this project and put this project together. Sorry, my lights are sort of dying on me. So what MLA worked out was that if surplus calves could be finished to a 300 kilogram carcass, there'd be $550 million per annum of industry turnover. So that's a really significant amount of money for the beef industry. So there's this real push from both DA and MLA to pull these surplus calves into our dairy beef supply chain. So we also talk about the potential of consumer pull. So we keep seeing within media a real pull from animal liberation groups for us to not euthanize these calves on farm, for them to not go into the bobby calf space. We've got comments like ditch dairy. These calves are killed because they're no longer useful. There's a push that these animals not be treated as a waste product. So that's coming from the animal liberation groups, but they're starting to get traction with our consumers. We're also seeing cameras being put into some of the bobby calf slaughterhouses, and we know there's an abattoir in Tasmania now that has stopped slaughtering dairy calves because there was some footage that came out that was very negative. So now we've started to see suppliers. So Fonterra now in New Zealand has plans to be bobby calf free. So they're wanting these animals to go into that beef supply chain. So it's moved from animal liberation groups pushing to the consumer now starting to say, we don't want this to continue to happen. So there's a real opportunity for us both in the beef industry and the dairy industry, to work together to solve this problem, to use these calves that are surplus or maybe seen as a waste product and turn them into a really good quality beef product. So what is dairy beef? We see dairy beef referred to as dairy beef, dairy on beef. Really what it means is beef produced from dairy breeds or their crosses. So this includes cattle raised primarily from beef production from dairy herds. So we're talking about straight Holsteins, we're talking about Holsteins or Jerseys crossed with a British breed. All of these we're talking about in dairy beef. What we're not talking about in this project, in this situation, is cull cows. We're talking about surplus calves going into the meat industry. So currently there's a couple of different markets where these animals might be sold or traded. Someone might hold them for sell them in one, or they might hold them through this whole system. So we've got week-old calves. They're going onto the bobby calf truck, or they could be going to calf rearers. Then we've got our 110 kilo, approximately 12-week old, fully weaned calf. They might go to backgrounders, and those backgrounders are then selling a 400 kilo animal, which may go potentially to a feedlot, or it might just be finished, and that finished animal is sold for processing. But one person could be doing all of this. They might be grass fed, they might be grain fed, but these are the current markets where they're currently being sold. So I'm going to talk a bit about our project. So our project is called Growing Beef from Dairy. What we're aiming to do is to develop a series of modules that will be part of an extension project that will give producers, whether they be dairy farmers or beef producers, the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to breed, feed, and manage these surplus calves, focused on the target market that they're aiming to sell them into. So it's really around skill and knowledge development. We're not doing research as part of this project. We're pulling together a lot of information that's already available and putting it into a package that's easily accessible to anybody within the dairy beef supply chain. So our objective is to develop a bespoke extension and adopter package to assist farmers to make better informed decisions on the management of their surplus calves, with a focus on the target market for their calves. The key objective for us is to improve the welfare and the carcass quality of surplus calves. So within this project, there's a number of different participants. So we've got dairy producers who may keep the surplus calves and grow them out and exit them as a weaned animal. They might exit them as backgrounders, or they might finish them on grass and sell them directly to the processor, or they might sell them as 10-day-old calves. We've got calf rearers. So these might be contract rearers. The calves go to them to be reared. Then those calves will travel to potentially a backgrounder or a beef producer to go on grass. We've got our beef producers. We've got our backgrounders, our finishers. We've also got our processors that really need to understand the potential for these animals. And we've got our meat buyers and our retailers. Within that, we've also got our hobby farmers. So before I started this project, my background's not dairy, it's beef, cattle, and agronomy, cropping and pastures. When I thought of bobby calves, when I thought about surplus dairy calves, I thought of the ones that I see on hobby farms property. So the ones that, on small blocks, people buy them to raise and grow out. So some of our hobby small farmers do a really good job of raising them. And they care about these animals. They feed them enough, and they're producing an animal that quite happily can go into the supply chain. But there is cases where this isn't happening, and they're potentially quite a large risk for us from an animal welfare point of view. So our project will also focus on upskilling them as well. Within this whole of system approach, we've got genetics companies. So they're providing a lot of the advice to the dairy producers about what genetics to use. So our project does work and target them. We've got livestock agents. We know livestock agents provide a lot of advice to both our dairy producers and our beef producers in terms of the way they should manage their animals. So the livestock agents are really important to us in this project to make sure that they're giving the right advice to their producers. Same, I guess, goes for advisors and vets. We're working with consultants and we're working with vets as part of the project, so that to upskill them. So obviously we're not teaching vets technical stuff around nutrition. They've probably got a lot of that covered, but about some of the potential for these animals to feed them in a way that will lead us to an animal that's a high quality finished animal that meets our market specifications. We need to work with transporters. The transporters can be carting these 10-day-old animals all the way through to finished animals. So it's really important that we work with transporters as well. And also our consumers. So a lot of what we're doing is around educating our consumers, whether they be mums and dads buying steak out of the supermarket, or whether they be the supermarkets themselves, or even the processors, educating them that dairy beef can be a quality product. So again, that's really important for this whole supply chain to work. Our consumer needs to understand that we're not selling them knickers, we're selling them a finished animal that meets market specifications. So within this project, we have some really diverse participants. Therefore, we're getting some really diverse outcomes. So we've got the animal that looks a bit like a coat hanger. I'm sure we've all seen dairy animals that look like this in a paddock where there's no grass. This isn't the animal that we want to see in the industry. Whereas the black, I think that's an Angus cross Holstein, one of Michael Campbell's animals. This is the sort of animal that we're looking for. It's only young, but it's starting to fill out. It's got muscle. We will start to see some fat cover on it as it gets older. It's obviously in the yard, so it's not on quality feed at the moment, but you can tell by looking at that animal, it's on good tucker. So as part of our project, we've got a number of modules. So our introduction module just involves a decision tree. So that helps the potential dairy beef participant work out where they sit in that supply chain. It also gives them some ideas about some of the things that they need to focus on in terms of upskilling themselves. Then we've got a breeding and genetics module. We've got markets, including meat quality, and also including other things like potentially options with reduced emissions and things like that, which we'll talk about further on in the slides. We talk about pre-weaning nutrition and post-weaning nutrition, sourcing healthy calves, traceability and food safety. And sorry, the post-weaning nutrition includes pastures and supplementation. And then we've got a module on transport. Also, as part of the project, we had some producer demonstration sites. So we worked with DA, so Gippsland Dairy, down in Gippsland in Victoria, to put together some dairy producers, some supply chain members, and beef producers. The beef producers were also dairy producers in this group. We put together this core group to identify opportunities and knowledge gaps. We met once every 6 weeks to do sort of online training, to hear from different industry professionals. We then ran some demonstration sites, and we ran some a fairly big field day where we had some of our producers speak and some of our supply chain members speak as well. We're also using this group to review and provide feedback on our modules. So we've had some field days, we've got some production data and some financial data from one of our producers to be able to create some case studies. But really, some of the important things is what those producers have learned and feeding that back to that core group and feeding it back to us. So as I mentioned, the location's in South Gippsland. Given this is a national webinar, I thought I'd better throw a photo in. So we're looking around that area, around Moe, Mibu North, Langatha, that sort of area. So high rainfall, really great dairying country. So we've got 10 producers. Kristen Davies was our facilitator from Gips Dairy. She's moved into a role with Dairy Australia. We've got genetics companies, we've got advisors, consultants, vets, we've got Greenhams and Elite Dairy Beef working with us, so both in the processor side of the supply chain. So yeah, it's been a really good process to work with these producers to understand what's working, what's really working well. So we've got one producer that has been supplying to the same market 150 kilo steers that are a Wagyu Friesian, Wagyu Holstein cross. They've been doing that for 15 years. Yeah, they've got an established supply chain. They have a really good relationship with their buyer, the company that they're working with. One of our producers has just started doing some embryo transplants of high value Wagyu into their cows. And yeah, being able to sell them for a premium. So there's some really exciting stuff that sort of happened within the PDS. So what I might cover now is just some of the opportunities for beef producers to get involved in dairy beef. So there's a couple of things I'll cover. Firstly is reduced carbon footprint, then the potential for meat quality, and then we'll talk a bit about the consistency of supply that we get with the dairy beef animals. So when we think about our reduced carbon footprint, currently there's probably not a lot of us, as I said, Tanisha said, we're beef producers as well. There's probably not a lot of us that are getting paid a premium because of our carbon numbers, a reduction in our emissions. But some of our, I guess, companies that we're supplying to are really starting to look at their own footprints. I've got a photo here that's come straight off the McDonald's website, where they're saying we're taking action on climate and transforming their food systems to be more resilient for the future ahead. And so they've got some plans for reduction of emissions. So a 50% reduction in their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions related to their restaurants, their offices, those sort of things by 2030. A 50% reduction in their scope 3 emissions related to their facilities, logistics, packaging, those sort of things by 2030. And a 16% reduction in their scope 3, which is forest, land and agriculture emissions. And this is relating to their beef and chicken farming activities by the end of 2030. So to put that into a bit of perspective, I'm just going to cover through what scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions are. So scope 1 emissions are our direct emissions from the source that's either owned or controlled by the business. Scope 2 are indirect emissions, and that's generally purchased energy that's consumed by the business, but it's actually burned or created outside of the business. And scope 3 is all other indirect emissions that occur in the value chain, both upstream and downstream. And so to better explain how that works, a beef producer's emissions might be the methane produced from their cows. It might be the fuel that they're burning to run their tractors, run irrigation pumps, those sort of things. Scope 2 is energy that they might buy in. So the electricity that they use that's not generated on farm, but they're using to run electric fences, pumps, bores, offices, those sort of things. Scope 3 is things like seed, if it's purchased in, fertilizer and chemical. It might be transport of stock, seed, fertilizer to or from the farm, and it could be the processing of the product that they produce. So that's their emissions, scope 1 and 2 for a beef producer. For a fast food restaurant, scope 1 might be gas gas that's burnt to cook patties or cook the food. It might be transport of food from their factories to their restaurants. It could be energy involved in the restaurant itself. Scope 2 emissions is again power that's bought in, so electricity that they buy from a supplier. Scope 3 is transport of product by vehicles that aren't owned by the fast food chain. It can be the waste product, it can be packaging, and it can also come from farmers. So their scope 3 is the fuel that we use running our tractors and the emissions from our livestock. So when we think about that final claim that they've or plan that they have to reduce emissions, 16% reduction in their scope 3, that's a reduction in our part of their supply chain. So it might be a methane reduction, it might be fuel reduction. They're going to start looking at low emitting producers to supply them because they want to decrease their scope 3s by 16%. So why is emissions from dairy beef lower than beef? A normal beef production system? When we have our breeders, our cows, all the emissions related to them, so all the methane that they are producing is allocated to the calf and to the beef that we produce. When we think about a dairy though, not all of the emissions goes to that meat. Potentially, and it depends a bit on the production system, but potentially 85% of the emissions from that cow actually goes to the milk. Only 15% is going to the meat. So what that means is the beef that we produce from a dairy beef system has far less of that cow's methane allocated to it. So I thought it might be worth just running this through a scenario. So this is a scenario that I used the SB-GAF tool, which is a tool that allows producers to work out or model, I guess, what their emissions are. So I created a bit of a scenario with 100 steers grazing forage oats. These steers purchased at 200 kilos, sold at 420 kilos, potentially to a feedlot. And I compared straight beef animals to dairy beef animals. And when I pulled those numbers out, 61% in a beef system, 61% of our emissions comes from the cow. That's scope 3. So it's come from the cow that's not on our farm because we've bought these steers in, but it comes from that cow. When we look at a dairy beef animal, only 7% comes from that animal being brought on from the emissions from its mother. So what it means is a dairy beef animal, we're using 6.4 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of live weight, whereas our beef animal is 9.8 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of live weight. So you can see there's a real opportunity here if we're looking to reduce emissions for somebody who might be trading animals, who might have forage crops, dual purpose crops, to potentially look at a dairy beef animal rather than a beef animal if they're aiming at a market that's looking for a reduced emissions profile from that business. So one of the next questions that we see an opportunity is meat quality. So often when we go and talk to people about dairy beef, they say, "Oh, it's really tough. It's terrible meat. It's really lean. It's not the sort of meat that we're after." So MLA identified this and they asked the question, is there any difference in eating quality of dairy beef compared to beef breeds? So this data I'm about to present has come from an MSA funded project that was run by CSU. And the project's aiming at creating a dairy beef supply chain to increase the value and volume of beef and veal producers. So that's the project title. If you're interested in it and you look up that title, you'll find the reports. And these are the scientists that were involved in the project. So very simply, when they looked at, they grew out a number of beef animals and some Holstein animals. They had them on different diets. So some were grass fed, some were grain fed, some were on a really high high growth grain supplement over their whole, or grain ration, I should say, over their entire lives. But when we look at it, just comparing Holstein and beef, the daily average daily grain on farm did vary. The beef were higher when they were on pastures. Once we put them on grain, there wasn't really much of a difference between the Holstein and beef. Carcass weights did vary a bit, but things like our MSA score, which tells us about our eating quality, wasn't a lot different. pH wasn't a lot different. Ossification wasn't a lot different. So these animals were still grading MSA. One of the big differences is around eye muscle area and muscle shape, but we'll touch on that as we go on. They also put the meat from those animals through eating quality tests. So these are people actually trying the different meats and rating them on how much they enjoyed it, more or less. And as you can see from this graph, there's no significant differences between beef animals, Holsteins cross Jersey or Jersey, in terms of their eating quality for a number of different cuts. And just to emphasize that they can produce high quality meat, this is an Angus cross Holstein animal. It's well marbled, it's well fat. It is a little bit different shape, but yeah, I'd be quite happy to be having that for dinner tonight. So the final thing I wanted to talk about on opportunities was the consistency of supply. So the national dairy herd size doesn't fluctuate as much as our beef herd does when it's dry. So yeah, there's a number of animals coming through very regularly. You know the number that of calves that are going to be produced. We know that our dairy herds use a lot of performance data, genetic data. There's a lot of AI used, so we know that we can really get genetic gain quite quickly. I guess where the real benefit we have here as beef producers is if we have a relationship with a dairy, we have a contract to take their calves, we know what we're going to get. We know how many. It's not going to be drought and weather related. We know that there's generally going to be the same amount of calves coming every year. We know the genetics of them, and we can make some really good decisions around, around some of the beef genetics that we might use with them, because we've got so much information about the dairy genetics that are there. So we've talked a little about opportunities, but there is some barriers, and to me, one of the big barriers is people thinking about knickers rather than thinking about this black baldy looking steer. It's really around the way people think about dairy beef. So I guess on that space, the ability to sell dairy beef is a real barrier. We need to get processors accepting it, and we know there's processors moving into this space, doing a really good job. So that's already starting to happen. Processors are seeing these animals as a really high quality product, but it's up to us as the producers of these dairy beef animals to ensure that we're always producing a good quality product. We know that sometimes there's some issues with supply chain. So someone like Nickers isn't going to fit into our supply chain because he's just too big. So we don't want those big, I guess they're referred to as coat hanger style animals that aren't going to fit into a supply chain, fit into a kill chain. We need customer acceptance. So one of the things that we do know is that the loin cut shape is quite different. So that top one, which I showed you before, is the Angus cross dairy animal. It's a much more similar loin shape that you'd expect, whereas the one below is a Holstein, and that does look different. So we need to educate the consumer that they might look a little bit different. There's not going to be a difference in taste. It still should be a quality eating product. And there's also a lack of calf rearers, which we will cover a bit further on. So one of the big barriers that we see is actually rearing the calves. So we need infrastructure. We need shed space to rear them. We need the people rearing them to know how to do it. We need space in rearing sheds on dairy farms. So dairy farms will often have enough space to rear their replacement heifers, but they may not have space to rear surplus calves. So we need either them to do it or someone else to build sheds to do that. Staff time is a real barrier. They are very time intensive, and the sale price. So when dairy farmers aren't getting the money back from that they've spent on them rearing, it's pretty hard to get them to go through that process, and that's what we saw in November of last year. And then we look at markets and marketing. So often dairy farmers aren't connected into the beef supply chain as well as what a beef producer would be. We need to, as I mentioned before, our livestock agents and our advisors provide a lot of advice in this space. So we really need to get them upskilled so that they can provide good advice to people working in the dairy beef industry. Often we find that the genetic selections can be quite reactive to current markets. So someone, if it's a good year for beef cattle prices, we'll see a lot more beef genetics being put into the dairy cows. But what we know is that the price at insemination is often very different to the price that we'll end up selling those animals for. So we've got to get people to stop thinking, I guess, reactively and thinking about this is a long-term market that will have ups and downs. And we need to really think about some of the influence of bad experiences. So there's been companies in the past in this space that have, I guess, not done so well and left some dairy farmers and some beef producers with bad feelings about dairy beef. So we need to get around some of those barriers. So if you're interested in getting involved in dairy beef, what should you do? The key message of this project is breed, feed, and manage your dairy beef for your target market. It's really around focusing on what your buyer wants. So this is a Greenham's, a snapshot of the Greenham's website. They have a dairy beef program, but to supply into that dairy beef program, there's some key requirements, and those might be around some animal welfare requirements. They can be around the way those animals are managed. So they're generally not grain fed. They're grain free. They're hormone free, antibiotic free. So there's some some things that you need to ensure that they also it might be too small to see, but you can also get a premium from using the beef genetics that they prefer. So there's some real opportunities there if you understand what the market that you're selling into really wants and fit into those. Again, with genetics, understanding the market that you're selling into. If you're a dairy producer, if you're a beef producer and you're looking to buy the calves, talk to the dairy farmers or rearers you're buying calves off and tell them what genetics you want in those calves. It's the genetics that your purchaser, whether it be feedlot or processor, is wanting. But this is really important. When we've been going through this project, we've been asking dairy farmers how they make those decisions. Some dairy farmers are using EBVs, they're talking to suppliers, they're doing a really great job selecting genetics. We've got some producers that are using animals like Speckle Park genetics because they look cute in the sale yards. They also use Speckle Parks to show when dairy the dairy genetics stop and the beef genetics starts as a bit of an indicator when they're calving. We've got some dairy producers who are using low lines purely for calving ease. So it's really important that we as beef producers who are looking to buy from dairy producers talk to them and explain to them what we need in terms of genetics. Sourcing healthy calves is really important, and one of the key things is making sure that they've had colostrum. When you're looking at calves, their physical appearance is really important. So they've got to be older than 7 days old. They need to be visibly growing, have grown well. They're not little and tiny. Supple skin, shiny coat, be alert, bright-eyed, have a dry and healed navel, show reasonable conformation and not have scours. So really important to get a healthy calf. Talk to the dairy farmer, talk to them about disease and vaccinations of their cows as well, to make sure that the calves coming onto your property are healthy and they're going to do. With nutrition, again, colostrum is critical. They all need to have access to water, especially if you've got young calves. Feed high volumes of milk and milk solids. Get that calf really strong, get it healthy, and get those good weight gains. So much of their lifelong weight gains can be impacted on in these first early days. So it's really critical that we get these things right. So the birth to 12 weeks is an ideal time to really set this animal up to do well. And the final thing that if you want to get involved in dairy beef is to do the dairy beef modules once they're released, because this project is a 3-year project. We're only 12 months into it. They're not online yet. When they do come online, they'll be on the MLA website under their toolbox. So the MLA toolbox is online training tools and resources. They will be based on the MLA website. But if you don't want to wait till then and you want to keep track of the project and you want any further information, if you scan this QR code, that will put you on our mailing list, on our newsletter list. You can also jot down my email and feel free to send me an email and I'll put you on the list. I actually won't do it because I don't know how, but Jane, who works in our office, will do that for you. So yeah, if you're interested in being involved in the dairy beef project, please get in contact with us. So Tanisha, I think I've gone a bit over in time, so I think I better stop there.
Perfect. Thanks, Callen. I'll just take the screen sharing back. We've got a few questions that have come through already, so we'll make a start. But for those, if you have any questions, remember to head to slido.com and enter the code July 2024. Callen, the first question that we've got here is, how do the costs stack up with ET and high value Wagyu?
So the cost of
I assume the cost of
embryo
the egg.
transplant. Yeah, so I haven't seen the financials of that that system yet. They've only just started doing it and working with they're actually working with a overseas Wagyu genetic supplier. So yeah, something we're
Will
very interested in, but sorry, I can't give you an answer of
That's okay. Will
how it
they be
works.
available at some point, Callen?
We're hoping that'll be a case study that'll be
Excellent.
part of our modules.
Awesome. Very good.
Yeah.
The next question that we've got is why do such a high amount of the emissions go to the milk?
So I'm not an expert in this space. As I said, my background's agronomy. My understanding is though, and Tanisha, you're probably better at answering this than I am, but my understanding is that it's around where the energy flows. So much of that cow's energy goes to milk production.
Yep, that's right. Very good. Thanks, Callen. The next one here is if I am a beef trading business with a high scope 3 figure from purchasing livestock, will I see an emissions reduction by changing to dairy beef?
Yeah. What I'd say to that is go through and maybe do Carbon Edge, which is a LA project, so that you really understand that system. Plug your own figures into the calculator, whether it's the MLA online calculator or the um, or the Excel spreadsheet, and put your own figures into it. But from the scenario that I've ran through, yes, those scope 3 emissions were reduced by, I think, around 30% from memory, by by buying dairy beef.
And that's through the reduction in the emissions intensity of the dairy meat compared to the beef.
Yep.
So, the next one, Callum, we've got is does a crossbred, for example, Angus cross Holstein, impact eating quality when compared to pure breeds? I think that was the graphs that you had were just pure breed data.
Yeah, so I guess what they're trying to do within that MLA project was prove that the Holstein um, the Holstein animals didn't have lower eating quality than a British breed animal. So they actually didn't do the any crosses, which I think we get asked this question every time. Every time I've seen that data presented, someone says, "What about the cross?" The theory is that it shouldn't reduce eating quality because we know we're already getting good eating quality from Angus. Crossing it with a Holstein that we've proven has good eating quality shouldn't have a reduction in eating quality.
Very good. Excellent. Thanks, Helen. And I've got one more question here, but if anyone else in the audience has any more, just head to Slido and enter July 2024 and we can answer a few more questions. Do any of our export markets take dairy beef?
Yeah. So my understanding is the Greenham's supply chain, a lot of it goes to the US. So yeah, some of our export, yeah, there is potential for dairy beef to be exported.
Excellent. And are you seeing through the project, Helen, that there's a big opportunity for that, or is it more domestically?
We're seeing both. Yeah, we're seeing both. So um, there's there's quite a few dairy beef supply chains that are running already. Some of it's domestic, some of it's export. So yeah, we would love to see these animals fit into a beef production system. Um, yeah, wherever beef can go, dairy beef should be able to go.
Yeah, definitely. That would make sense. And I had a question myself, Callan. How much does the calf rearing influence the lifetime productivity of that beast?
Yeah, massively, Tanisha. So I think there's a previous slide. I'll skip back to it on. Oh, no, I can't. My slides are on. There was a slide around nutrition. You can set an animal up for really high production in that first or pre-weaning stage. It doesn't. You can you can still have a low performing animal if you don't manage it well after that. But if you don't set them up properly, it'll never be a well-performing animal. So it's really critical that pre-weaning those animals are set up for growth and set up to be a healthy animal, because if you don't do it, they're going to be behind the 8 ball the whole way through.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. Shows
So
the importance in relationships in dairy beef, I think.
yeah. And that the rearers are so critical to this supply chain. We need more rearers, and we need really good rearers.
Excellent. Thanks, Callen. It doesn't look like we've had any more questions come through, but I will ask everyone that's online if you could head to Slido and complete the evaluation survey for tonight's webinar. It really helps us to guide future topics. And also, if there's any last minute questions that come through for Callen, Callen and I will be recording a podcast about this as well. So we'll make sure to get to any of those extra questions that you have. Callen, thank you so much for sharing some great information about growing beef from dairy tonight. I know I've certainly learnt a lot, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes of this project and following it through to see where this goes, because I think it's a very exciting industry with a lot of potential. So yeah, as I mentioned to everyone, if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics, be sure to complete the survey at the QR code on the screen. It's really important. And if you're listening to this recording, also complete the survey if you can. I would like to thank everyone for attending, and we look forward to you all joining us for our next webinar, which will be on the 14th of August. We'll be hearing from Elkie Hocking about hot tips for top heifers, so another beef related webinar topic, and that'll be on the 14th of August next month. If you missed last month's webinar, make sure you head over to the MLA or AgSTAR website to watch it. And be sure to check out our podcast series that I've mentioned. You can find that on all major podcast platforms under the Productivity and Profitability Media Series. Thank you, everyone, and happy listening.